Now then, I think one of the highlights of this year's festival is currently on display in the Millennium Galleries. And for anybody who hasn't yet been to see the incredible, moving and mind-blowing work that the Shoah Foundation is doing with their New Dimensions in Testimony program, I thoroughly urge you to go there. The work they're doing is phenomenal, groundbreaking, and will make you all look at the work that you do in a very different way, I think. So we're very delighted here to have Dr. Stephen Smith from USC Shoah Foundation, who is going to give us a glimpse into his New Dimensions in Testimony program.
Good morning. We're here to talk about stories, so let's start with a story. It begins in the town of Łódź, Poland. A little boy, Pincus is his name. Pincus was growing up in his family, his mother and father, his twin sister Sabina. They lived in a religious home in Łódź, Poland, and it came with all of the trappings of being in a religious home, daily routine, festivals, going to Hebrew school and learning the Hebrew alphabet while learning Polish, and living in the little streets and towns and running to the Stiebel, the little synagogue where his grandfather would go to pray. Everything seemed as it should be to a child that was growing up with his twin, the twin that learned to walk with him and talk with him and explore life with him, Sabina. All that came to an end abruptly, 1939, September, when the Nazis invaded Poland, and Pinchas, as he was known, and his twin sister Sabina became victims of National Socialism. Children, 7 years old. The family made their way to Warsaw, were in the Warsaw Ghetto, and at the age of 11, Pinchas was in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, that amazing time when Jews pulled themselves together. His father, a Hasidic Jew, built, with other men in the building, a cellar where their families could go and hide when the uprising took place. And then it took place, and there was this amazing few weeks of resilience and resistance. And then came the bang on the trap door. And Pinchas and Sabina and the parents, Mendel and Helena, came out of the cellar. And there for just one brief moment, they were not Jewish victims of Nazi genocide. Right there and right then, the gun that was pointed at the family was because the Germans were scared of them. For just a few moments, they were prisoners of war of the Nazis, not the victims of genocide. But then that was soon over, and they were on a train, and they went to Majdanek. They were taken to Majdanek. Majdanek, one of the 6 death camps of Nazi Germany. The men, you've seen it before, the men were separated from the women. And as Pinchas and his father were standing with the men, he saw his sister Sabina and his mother being separated too, and the distress that caused to Sabina. And they were then reunited. But that meant that both of them went around the corner of the little brick building, which they didn't know what that was at that moment in time. And Sabina had long golden hair and a plait, a braid, that she always kept. And Pinchas's last memory of his twin sister was seeing her golden braid disappearing around the corner of the brick building, and then never saw her again. The story of Pinchas Gutter then goes on and on. So I thought we might ask him a few questions about his experience. Pinchas, where are you from?
I was born in Łódź, in Poland.
How old are you?
I was born in 1932, so you can make your own arithmetic.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a twin sister.
What was the name of your sister?
My sister's name was Shifra, but everybody called her Sabina.
What do you remember about your sister?
My memories of Sabina are several, but most of them are from the ghetto in Warsaw. The first one, she had very beautiful, long, blonde hair, which my mother used to either have 2 plaits or just 1 plait. And in the Warsaw ghetto, it was very difficult to keep your hair clean because people didn't have shampoo, there was not very much soap. And my mother tried to cut her hair short so it would be easier to keep clean, but she wouldn't let her. So I remember kind of almost like happenings that every few days my mother would wash her hair with neft to kill the lice and the eggs of the lice, which in Polish were called gnidi. And actually you could see them. They were like little, little white things sticking to the hair. My mother would spend an hour or 2 trying to clean her hair, but she wouldn't allow her. So that's a memory that actually sticks in my mind very much so.
Do you have any regrets?
I regret my family, my surroundings, my life. I regret the fact that I am not, that the life that existed in Poland before the war doesn't exist. I regret the fact that I am not part of that life, and that a life that I was born into being, and that I had to, go through all these, tortures and sufferings. And mostly, I regret not being able to remember my sister. That when I think of my sister Sabina, I can only remember her braid, her golden braid, and nothing else. And I think that is something that is so deeply hurting that I would say that's the thing that I most regret, that I cannot remember her or that I cannot be with her. My twin sister.
Do you know any jokes, Pincus?
I don't want to tell you my favorite Yiddish joke. My favorite Yiddish joke is when you ask somebody, what is the most terrible thing that can happen to you? And your answer is, terrible. Nothing is terrible. The only thing is terrible is when you swallow an umbrella, the umbrella opens inside and you want to take it out. That is terrible.
Okay, I'm just going to switch
that
now.
That's my favorite Yiddish joke.
All right, I'm going to backtrack for a moment and just turn to a PowerPoint just to explain a few things about this. USC Shoah Foundation, University of Southern California. Shoah Foundation was started in 1993 by Steven Spielberg. The idea was to collect testimonies of Holocaust survivors and witnesses to the Holocaust. A small project which resulted in a mission to overcome intolerance and prejudice, intolerance, and hatred and the suffering it causes through the educational use of the testimonies. So you'll see, we are documenting history, but the mission is about something else. It's about how that history impacts the way in which we think and behave and our attitudes in the world today. You'll also see by some of the pictures of the thumbnails from the archive, not only survivors of the Holocaust, but in fact of genocides around the world that have taken place over the last 100 years. Few testimonies, 53,250 in total, taken in 63 countries in 40 languages, the last of them Quiche, a little Mayan language from Guatemala about 3 weeks ago. 112,246 hours so far, and still counting. That would take us 12.8 years to watch if we sat here 24 hours a day to watch the archive, and of course we'd need to speak 40 languages also. It's accessed through 63,000 keywords. It actually also has an image archive of around about 700,000 images, because the people that gave their testimonies included them in there. And they talk about people. Obviously, when Pincus Gutter talked about his experience, he talked about his sister Sabina, his father, Mendel, his mother, Helena, and actually many of the extended family of the Gutter family who have no grave, have no place, have no archive that you can go to. And so their names being there is actually, it becomes all of that in some respects. People are watching this in different ways. 6.5 million people hit play on the archive last year. About 15 million saw content through social media, and about 500 million or so through documentaries that were produced from the content. So people are starting to see this stuff, but we were still left with a question. That is, so what is the future? You can search that and find virtually anything about the way in which the Holocaust happened. But one of the things we were thinking about, so what does the future mean without survivors of the Holocaust as a part of our community? This project is produced by the USC Shoah Foundation, but actually was created by Heather Mayer, who was running a small company called Conscience Display. She was putting an exhibition together in San Diego with 10 families who'd survived the Holocaust, their children and grandchildren. And what she found when she was talking, and had been talking to survivors for a very long time, the real moment was in the conversation that was taking place between her and the survivors. And had noted as well that Holocaust survivors are going to schools and colleges and universities, and her question was, so how do you capture the conversation? She tried something in 3D, didn't like putting the glasses on. Tried asking questions with a touchpad and a menu bar, but it just seemed with the glasses and the interface, it wasn't very human at all. And so came to the Shoah Foundation and said, so how about we create a glassless 3D interview the Holocaust survivor where you can have a conversation. I thought that was brilliant. Not all my colleagues agreed. And so it took a little bit of time to figure out, is it the right thing to do, actually, to create an interactive Holocaust survivor? Heather Mayer's with us, sitting right there, and it's a pleasure to have you with her. And one byproduct of this, by the way, is we're also now married. We weren't at that time. We got together. In fact, Heather Mayer then did a search around the world to try and find where are the technologies, because this didn't exist, where you could stitch together the video with the natural language processing and do that in 3D glassless video. And it turns out that all of those technologies existed at the University of Southern California in a lab that we didn't even know existed, called the Institute of Creative Technology. Had it been in Japan or in London, then I would have had even more air miles than I currently do. Fortunately, it was on our campus. We went to the scientists and said, how about you 4 labs within this one institute come together to create an integrated technology that will allow us to do this? And that's what we did. So here's Pinchas inside Light Stage 6. About 6,000 LED lights pointing at him, that's about all. And he's trapped in this 20-foot dome for 5 days, 5 hours a day. And so it became really important in terms of how we cast this to ensure that we could get through this process. And I was very lucky that I had known Pincus for nearly 15 years and had been on a long journey with him of discovery of his own story, and had shared deeply with me. And we had a very deep relationship of trust. And boy, did we need it, because he was stuck in there. We didn't know whether the cameras that we were going to point at him were going to work or not. And in fact, they didn't on day one. So he was sitting in there for a very long time, saying absolutely nothing while we tinkered with the cameras. Finally, after doing a proof of concept, we got back in 2014 for full production. And as you can see from this, Pincus was subdued to 50 cameras, 3D stereo pair down the middle so that he could look into the 3D cameras, but then 50 cameras around him, producing almost 360. In fact, in his case, it was a 180. We filmed him for 7 days, 5 hours a day, and we asked him over 1,000 questions, and he gave over 1,500 responses. All of those responses then go into a database, And that database is then, with natural language processing, we look at the text of what he said, and then we try to match that. It's a keyword search, actually. That's what it is. The idea was to try and create eye contact, because what we and Heather had originally identified was it's the point at which you're asking your question, but somebody's looking back at you and giving you the answer, because that's where the connection is most real. We interviewed now 12 Holocaust survivors. Among them, Anita Lasker-Wolfish, who's at the top there, from London. She was the last survivor of the Auschwitz Orchestra. She played the cello in the Auschwitz Orchestra. And down here, Eva Schloss, also from London, who we brought over to LA to be filmed. Her mother survived the war, as did Anne Frank's father. And they'd actually began their 4 weeks difference in age, her and Anne Frank, and lived in the same apartment building as refugees before they went into separate attics. Eva's mother survived with her. Anne Frank's father survived also at Auschwitz, and then Eva's mother married Otto Frank, so she became Otto Frank's stepdaughter after the war. A remarkable woman and a remarkable testimony. We've interviewed 12 Holocaust survivors now in this program. We're at the point now where we're also using it. So in the Illinois Holocaust Museum, they're one of our partners. A number of the survivors that we interviewed were from Illinois, and for a year now it's been tested in that museum on a daily basis with different types of audiences. Also in the US Holocaust Museum, we have a pilot version set up there that people don't realize is a pilot, and they come through the exhibition and then just interact with Pinchas as a part of their museum tour. Just a couple of things about outcomes. We're evaluating this very strongly. Very, very interesting, very strong response to this, pre and post. Just a few of the things that we're testing. How do audiences respond to it, and particularly young people respond to it? And we're seeing stronger results with the interactive testimony than we do with the regular 2D. And we're thinking that's something to do with the connectivity that they get. Lots of nice audience feedback, which I won't read to you, other than to say that that does form a part of what we're trying to understand is, not only did it react and did it find the right answer, but also how did people feel about what they saw and experienced? Because it sometimes, as it happens in human interaction, I ask you a question, you give me a completely different answer, but I think it's fine. And that's also been happening quite a lot, and the experience of users is very strong, even if he doesn't always understand them. In fact, 100% of docents in the museum guides that have been using this strongly agree that it enhances the museum, which is always good if the actual professionals like it. 87% of audience response to the technology was excellent, even when the response rate wasn't 87%, which is also quite interesting. And students are 68% of students showed stronger critical thinking skills pre and post, which is a remarkable figure, and we're still trying to verify whether that's just early figures and whether we can continue. But we're evaluating this very, very strongly. Most importantly, we're finding that people say that what this enables it to do is bring the storytelling to life in some way that we've not actually seen before. So I've got one question for Pinchas here. We'll go back to him if we could. Pincus, what do you think about this project?
I think this project is very, very important. It is important because you will be able to not just read or see the testimony of people, but you will be able, whoever does this, and how many of these projects you do, these are the people of the future who will be able to engage with the individuals who are there and who actually need to know what happened on a personal level. It will mean much more than just watching a video or just listening to a testimony in audio.
So let's just take a couple of questions for Pincus from the audience, and then just to demonstrate it's not just a PowerPoint going, that I'm doing here. Anybody got a question they'd like to put to Pincus? Somebody might, yes. If you say it to me, I'll repeat it back to him.
It is the question I asked him yesterday, was how Pincus felt about Holocaust deniers like David Irving.
Okay. Pincus, what do you feel about Holocaust deniers like David Irving?
I am very upset when I hear or see or read Holocaust denial. And it's quite understanding for somebody who spent 5 years in hell, you know, suffering and being tortured by the perpetrators of the Nazi ideology, and who had lost 99% of his family to the Nazis, where they were murdered. And for whatever reason, people come along later on and tell to somebody like me, who is a witness, a living witness, somebody who experienced this on his own back, that this did not happen, it becomes unbelievable. And I believe that they are just as bad as the perpetrators that actually happened, that made this thing happen. And I would actually lock them all up. I would actually take them, every one of those should be actually taken to a court of law, because those lies are contempt of humanity, not only contempt of court or contempt of or just ordinary lies, they're actually contemptuous of humanity itself.
So we're seeing Pincus here in 2D on just a regular projector. Obviously, we collected a lot more data than we're seeing in this 2D. So he can be projected on a Pepper's Ghost. In fact, we've been working with that, so that you could see him Tupac or Michael Jackson style in a theater, auditorium, sitting and then answering questions. He also does tell his story. So he has a 5-minute, a 20-minute, and a 45-minute version of his story. So in a museum setting, you might do a short version of that, followed by questions. But in a classroom setting, you might actually, in class 1, on Monday, listen to all 45 minutes of his story, and then the homework is to go away and see what you want to ask him, and then you come back on Wednesday for your next class, and then you have the Q&A as a follow-up to that. So different versions of his story. He can also be projected 3D, with glasses. But we're also working on a projector array at USC such that you can, and we actually have a prototype, such that you can see him now 3D glassless, full size, and sitting in the room with you. And that will be available at some point in the future. We made those decisions because we knew if we didn't collect the data now for this, that we weren't going to collect it later, because our subjects range between 83 and 92 years old. So it's not like you say, can you come back in 10 years' time when the technology's matured. We just wanted to collect the data that we could. What we'll do instead, we'll invite Pincus Gutter to come and join us on the stage. Pincus. Anybody? Have a seat. Could I just borrow the hand mic for Pincus? Do you mind if I just... Yeah, perfect. We were very fortunate. This guy lives in Toronto. His daughter lives in London, and he was here visiting, so we can't miss this opportunity to share the stage together. Pincus, thank you. Thank you for being here. He's here with his wife, Dorothy, who's schlepped around the world with him everywhere, including Poland last month, once again. I want to ask you a couple of questions, Pincus. First of all, so what do you think of this project? You've already answered that, but let's hear what you say.
Well, I've answered that many times, you know, on the actual video. But a thought as, you know, now that you've developed it, and I've actually seen it in Chicago, and I've seen it in other places, the way it works, it suddenly, what struck me, it struck me this morning, that can you imagine, we don't have any more veterans from the First World War. And if veterans from the First World War had this kind of technology available at the time, and would have been able to firsthand, as witnesses, project to the world the horror that they experienced in the trenches and what went on in the First World War, what kind of effect would that have on humanity? How would that possibly have changed the world? I mean, I speak to schools and I speak to universities and I speak to, to educators and so forth and so on. And the reason why I do it is because I believe that by telling the story and telling what is happening and telling what can happen and what shouldn't happen and the way we should behave, could make the world a better place and avoid these terrible, iniquities that are going on at this very moment everywhere. So I really feel that such a project is absolutely, invaluable. I mean, it's something that is terribly important.
And what did you think the first time that we spoke? I think you maybe spoke to Heather about this project and were told about it. What was your reaction to that?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't think that it was possible because I kind of felt, on the one hand, I mean, I kind of thought, well, is that going to make me immortal or something, or is that what is that going to create? I mean, I couldn't fathom really the value of it, but I was very happy, and I think what you just said before, the important was that because we built up such a trust. It's very important for a Holocaust survivor. I mean, people don't realize that Holocaust survivors, I didn't start talking about the Holocaust until Stephen interviewed me in Cape Town for about 4 hours and took down a video. Because I never wanted to tell my children, I didn't want to burden them with my problems. And it's very dangerous because a lot of second-generation Holocaust survivors' children suffer from this, from the problems that bedevil their parents, because it's with us all the time. I mean, it didn't. When I was liberated, I would say the Calvary started. It's not. It wasn't the end of the suffering. I may have stuck it, kind of pushed it to the back of my mind. And it's very interesting. People often ask me, what happened when you were liberated? Well, I was in Theresienstadt. The Russians liberated me. I was 13 years old, and I was alone. And for the next 10 years, I didn't think about Holocaust. I tried to become a non-Holocaust person. And after that, the brain plays funny tricks. Suddenly, nightmares started, and things started really going awry. And so the thing is that Holocaust survivors live with that. But eventually, people like Stephen and others who have been able to persuade Holocaust survivors to speak, I think it's very important to do that and to share what happened and try and not speak only about the horrors and create a climate where everything is terrible. Because I want to tell you, in the concentration camps, in the death camps, there was a lot of goodness amongst human beings, and it was there, and you could, and it was palpable. You could feel it, and in those dark moments, to have human feelings. I was a child. I didn't quite understand everything, but in retrospect, I remember those moments. I'll give you one, for example. When I had typhoid in Skaržisko-Kamienné, in a death work kind of working camp, which after the war somebody wrote a book about it and called it in the factories of death. I had typhoid, and a Jewish policeman who was part of this of the interior administration of the camp changed my day shift to night shift, so I should be able to work with the women at night, and that was easier because I was recovering from the typhoid. And a woman came and gave me an apple, and I hadn't seen an apple for years, not even the Warsaw Ghetto. So she took that apple that she must have got from a Polish Christian that used to come from the outside and work on a daily basis and gave it to me to share. Now, that was something extraordinary that I've never forgotten.
Great. A couple of questions we've got time for, I think. Anything to Pinchas? Pinchas or me? Yeah.
Hi, Pinchas. Thanks for coming to see us. I'm really I was really engaged by this yesterday. I came across it by accident, not knowing I was going to find it. And I've actually made work about Holocaust survivors, documentary work. Was that all too quiet?
I think this project is incredible. I found it massively engaging and moving when I found it in the site gallery yesterday. And having had to try and make documentary work for television about Holocaust survivors myself, I'm really engaged in, you know, how we keep those stories alive. And I just wonder, thinking about Bina, the robot, I wonder how you would feel, in a way, if these technologies were in some way combined and to make you, you know, to make an immortal robot version of yourself.
Okay, Keir.
My hearing is not so good, so I'm not quite 100% sure. Can you just explain to me?
So the question is, how would you feel if this, what we did to capture the memory, was combined with the robotics, so that you get sort of a more robotic image or what android response?
Well, having watched the previous presentation, I mean, it's quite fascinating, but I don't think I would like to be, you know, kind of converted into a robot. Because you see, the importance, I think, of this particular project is the interaction with the persona. And as long as that persona is actually there, and I might not be there, you know, present, but you know, there were the children who thanked me at the end of the so basically they feel my presence, and I am actually there. And I think that is the important thing. The moment you convert me into a kind of extraordinary or extraterrestrial being, I think you would lose a lot of the actual interaction and influence.
So it's a really interesting question, and one that we grappled with the project itself, which is, where do the boundaries lie, and what's the engagement with the subjects themselves around what will happen with the memories that they're leaving. And in this particular instance, we agreed with them that the questions that they answered would stay as they are. In other words, we won't remash the content that they've given in answer to the question. Because, so what it means is the data set is set and is not going to change. Now, what we hope to do is make the search more intelligent and make it more cognitive, in the sense that it's going to be able to find, as the search algorithms change over time, that we'll be able to get into that content a little bit more deeply. But that was kind of an agreement with the interviewees in this case. But it's a really good question about what happens to all of that data in the 112,000 hours of content we've got, in terms of how does that memory bank, which is what it is, how does that memory bank play into how we understand that content and how we then represent that content back in future? And that's a very open question. This lady's got a question for, yeah.
I've got two questions, I'm really sorry. My first question is kind of an extension of that one. So are you recording any of the questions that are being asked? Are you reflecting back on the way users are interacting? And my second question is, Pincus, have you talked to Pincus? And what happened?
Have you talked to Pincus?
Well, in Skokie, when they had a 4 months or something pilot project, and in the last days of, well, they're still there. It was supposed to be the last days. I mean, I went there, and when I arrived, I stood next to my image, and I said to the audience that you can ask me any questions you want, and I'll answer them. And everybody burst out laughter. But the fact is that, you know, I did ask questions, and sometimes I got the right answer, but not always. But the fact that the most important thing that I want to kind of tell you is that the questions were asked, the answers were all spontaneous. I had no idea. I mean, all in all, I must have answered about over a period of actually 4 years, 2000, and when you said that was the last kind of big taping, but I came afterwards and I was there before. So over the period of 4 years, I answered something like close to 2,000 questions. And all these questions were spontaneously answered. I didn't know what was going to happen. Some of the questions were asked many times, the same question in a different guise. So the fact is, I think the important is that you never know what I'm going to say. Because, you know, it depends how you ask it, you know. So it's very, to me, the most important thing about this project is the ability to be able to project myself from the screen as something real, that I am there, my presence is there, regardless whether it's, you know, round or flat or whatever. You actually, if you go to an auditorium where the whole thing is set up, I'm sitting on this throne, I call it the throne, and I sat in that sphere, which everybody called the bubble, and I really felt that, you know, I did project me and I interacted. So when I watch people react to the question, you know, and my answers, I feel that I'm actually there, and I think that's important.
So just as a final wrap-up, because I know we're out of time, a couple of things. So first of all, this is a content-first, not technology-led project. So we had a real dilemma in terms of what level of technology do we want to engage with this? Because you can't quite do this with flashcards, and it doesn't quite work in audio only, but the lowest common denominator here is not high-fidelity 3D interactive. It's about the questions that he answers. First thing. Secondly, we decided we were going to make it platform agnostic. That was, we're trying to future-proof it as much as possible. So this was not a project for a platform or for a display in a particular place. It was about what range of data can we collect that will be highly flexible depending on what future technologies turn out to be, keeping in mind that it's content-led. Third thing was testing as we went. So this poor guy had to come back like 4 times, as he just mentioned, because we would take a data set and then we'd put it in front of an audience and we'd find out whether or not what we suspected they were going to ask, they really asked. And then we found out they didn't actually ask what we thought they were going to ask, so then we started over. Or not start over, but we iterated that several times. So now that goes on. So now that the version of Pincus is in the museums, the one reason it's there is to see what audiences really ask. All of you who've interacted with him in the exhibit there, you don't know this, but your question is being documented, and his answer. And then poor old Kia and Heather, who are sitting there, are going to go back to California and go through every single question that you asked and every single answer to see whether he was actually answering the question you asked, and if not, then they have to do a manual fix to actually get the keywording right. He needs about 50,000 interactions to become, we think, as fluid as possible. He's at about 25,000, and so 2,000 is nothing, Pincus, because the virtual Pincus has had over 20,000 so far. That will keep going for about another year or so while we continue to refine it so that it becomes more and more intelligent. So it's an ongoing process, and I want to thank this guy for being just a superstar. Thank you, Pincus.
Thank you.